Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis or even just fixing a machine, there's this underlying expectation of visual precision.
Right, yeah, like you can actually see the problem.
Exactly. It's like engineering. You break your arm, you go to the hospital, and the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the screen, and the doctor just points at it and says, there it is.
It's totally binary. And I mean, it's comforting because human beings are incredibly visual creatures.
Yeah.
We like our problems and our solutions to be visible, categorized, and just neatly boxed up.
Right. Broken or not broken,
Yeah.
functioning or not functioning, it's just clean. But then, you zoom in.
Way in?
Yeah, you look past the gears and the conveyor belts, and you look at the actual engines of modern manufacturing. You look at the biological processes that are quietly keeping the entire global supply chain moving right now, and suddenly that x-ray machine is completely useless.
Yeah, totally useless because you're looking at a landscape that is fundamentally invisible to the naked eye. We are talking about enzymes.
Right. And even if you don't know what they are, I mean, you interact with them constantly.
Oh, from the minute you wake up, really.
Exactly. Like you do your laundry in cold water to save energy, and the grease stains still miraculously come out. That is enzymes. You drink a perfectly clear glass of apple juice that, doesn't have a cloudy layer of pulp floating at the top.
Enzymes.
Yep. You take a digestive health supplement after a heavy meal, or you swallow an anti-inflammatory drug for a swollen joint. It is all enzymes. They are everywhere, just doing all the heavy lifting.
They really are.
So today we are going on a deep dive into Advanced Enzyme Technologies Ltd. They're known in the markets as ADVEENZYMEs, and they are actually India's largest enzyme company.
Which is a huge title.
It is. Our mission today for this deep dive is to decode how this highly specialized, research-driven biotech firm is trying to replace harsh, traditional industrial chemicals with biological solutions on a global scale.
And beyond just the science, we are going to critically examine the structure of the corporation itself.
Yeah.
Because we need to figure out whether their business model is a durable long-term powerhouse or if it's, uniquely vulnerable to global pressures that they simply cannot control.
And it is a phenomenal stack of sources we are working through today. I mean, we've got comprehensive financial analysis, really granular market research, and deep stock stories regarding ADNZYE's business model.
Yeah, and we're looking at the highly consolidated competitive landscape they operate in, and of course their overall financial health.
Right, and what stands out immediately is that they are operating in an environment where biological substitution is actively rewriting the foundational rules of industrial production.
It's a complete paradigm shift, yeah.
But, as we will see, having the best science in the laboratory doesn't automatically mean you have an indestructible business in the real world.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
The transition from a test tube to a balance sheet is incredibly perilous.
Okay, so let's unpack this. To understand the financials and the grand strategy here, we really first have to understand what exactly this company makes. Because it's not the end products you see sitting on the shelf at the supermarket.
Right. If you go looking for an ADENZYMSS brand loaf of bread or like a bottle of detergent, you won't find it. They are a B2B active ingredient supplier.
So they are not a consumer brand at all.
Exactly. The distinction is really critical here. They are the suppliers to the suppliers. They produce over 400 proprietary enzyme and probiotic products.
400 is a lot.
It's an enormous portfolio. And all of these 400 products are derived from a bank of 68 indigenous microbial strains. They have basically spent decades isolating, cultivating, and perfecting these highly specific microscopic workhorses.
Wow.
Yeah. And when you look at how they organize this giant portfolio, it's divided into three main business segments. So first you have human healthcare and nutrition.
Which, I mean, that sounds straightforward enough, but the biochemistry behind it is just wild.
It really is. I mean, this segment includes digestive enzymes like papain, which is actually derived from papayas.
Oh, right.
And bromelain, which comes from pineapples. They also produce probiotics like Saccharomyces boulardii, which is technically a yeast that functions as a probiotic to maintain your gut flora.
Right.
But the absolute crown jewel of this segment involves critical active pharmaceutical ingredients, or APIs, like serratiopeptidase.
Okay, I want to pause on serratiopeptidase for a second because, looking at the sources, they highlight this as a major revenue driver, but the actual biology of it is just fascinating. It originally comes from the intestine of the silkworm, right?
Yeah, that is correct. In nature, the silkworm uses this very specific enzyme to literally dissolve its incredibly tough cocoon so it can emerge as a moth.
So it's essentially a biological pair of scissors that's just designed to cut through tough, dead proteins.
Exactly. And scientists realized that if you introduce this into the human body, it acts as a very powerful anti-inflammatory. It basically binds to our blood plasma, travels right to areas of inflammation, and just dissolves the dead tissue and the proteins that cause the swelling.
And it does that without harming any living cells, right?
Exactly, yeah. It leaves the healthy cells completely alone.
It's like a targeted strike. And I mean, ADVNZYMS isn't farming millions of silkworms to get this stuff. They've isolated the specific microbial strain that produces it, and they just ferment it in these giant vats.
Precisely. They've totally industrialized the production of this biological tool. Which brings us to their second segment, which is animal nutrition. This is a really fascinating area of biochemistry, too.
Yeah, tell me about that.
So this involves feed enzymes like cellulase and xylanase. These are essentially biological keys that help livestock, specifically poultry and swine, digest plant-based feeds like corn and soy.
See, I was trying to picture this when going through the notes. Like, a farmer feeds corn to a pig. The pig eats the corn. Why on earth does the farmer need to buy an enzyme from ADBNZYMS to put into the corn? Doesn't the pig just digest it normally?
You would think so, right?
Yeah.
But think about the actual cellular structure of a plant. The nutrients inside a kernel of corn, or like a soybean, they are locked inside incredibly tough plant cell walls. And those walls are made of cellulose and hemicellulose.
Okay, so it's a structural thing.
Right. Now, ruminant animals, like cows, they have multiple stomachs and their own specialized gut bacteria to slowly break down those tough walls over time. But pigs and chickens, they just possess single-chambered stomachs. They simply do not naturally produce the specific enzymes required to break down that cellulose.
Oh, okay, so without a biological assist, the pig's digestive system basically just bounces off the cell wall.
It literally passes right through them. So the farmer is paying for all this feed, but the animal is only absorbing a fraction of the caloric and nutritional value. The rest just ends up as waste on the barn floor.
That sounds incredibly inefficient.
It is. So what ADVNZYMAS does is they supply cellulase, which is the enzyme that specifically attacks and dismantles that cellulose. When the feed manufacturer sprays this enzyme out of the feed, it acts like a microscopic demolition crew in the animal's gut.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it breaks open the plant cells, releasing all the trapped starches and proteins that were inside.
So it's a pure efficiency play. The farmer gets a higher yield of meat or eggs for the exact same amount of feed simply by unlocking the calories that were already in there to begin with.
Exactly. It is a non-negotiable efficiency in modern agriculture. And, that logic extends right into their third segment, which is industrial processing. This covers both food and non-food applications.
Okay, so what falls under that?
On the food side, you have enzymes for baking. So when you buy a popped loaf of bread and it stays soft for a week instead of turning into a literal brick in 2 days.
Yeah, I've always wondered how they do that without it just being full of plastic.
Right. Well, that is because specific amylase enzymes are actively slowing down the crystallization of the starches in the bread. And then on the non-food side, they supply the textile industry, leather processing, biofuels, and detergent manufacturers.
I'm trying to synthesize all these distinct use cases here. So wait, they don't make the anti-inflammatory pill, they don't raise the chickens, they don't weave the cotton t-shirt. They are basically supplying the invisible biological trigger that makes all of those end products viable at scale.
That's spot on.
It's almost like they are the Intel inside for biology.
That is a highly accurate way to conceptualize their position in the value chain, actually. Intel doesn't build the laptop, the screen, or the keyboard. They just build a microprocessor that allows the machine to compute.
Right.
ADVNZYMS builds the biological processor that allows the pharmaceutical formulation to reduce swelling, or allows the textile mill to remove impurities from cotton without dumping a ton of harsh, corrosive chemicals into the local river.
And the strategic shift occurring across all these industries right now is that these enzymes are moving from being a nice-to-have addition to an absolute must-have requirement.
Yeah, what's really fascinating here is how the definition of a baseline manufacturing standard has totally evolved. Like 20 years ago, maybe an enzyme in baking just made the crumb of the bread a little softer. It was a luxury addition.
Something to slightly improve the product.
Exactly. But today, if you look at biofuels, for example, enzymatic biomass degradation isn't an optional add-on. It is the core mechanism of generating the fuel itself.
You literally can't make it without the enzyme.
Right, and if you look at human healthcare, an API like serratiopeptidase isn't a flavor enhancer. It is the active mechanism of the drug. The drug fundamentally does not exist without it.
And from a purely commercial perspective, I mean, positioning yourself as the supplier of a must-have component is exactly the leverage point you want to occupy.
Oh, it leads to an incredibly attractive revenue model.
Yeah.
Because AVNZYMS is selling these highly specific active ingredients, they operate on a continuous replenishment cycle.
Because they get used up.
Yes. The textile mill depletes their stock of desizing enzymes with every single batch of fabric they run. The feed formulator uses up the cellulase in every silo of grain they mix.
So it's a razor and blades business model, except the blades are microscopic engineered proteins, and you literally dissolve them into your process so you have no choice but to buy more.
That's a perfect analogy. Furthermore, they actually own the intellectual property. They aren't just relying on complex, low-margin tolling agreements where they act as a contract manufacturer for someone else's invention.
Okay, so they own the recipe.
Yes, they are manufacturing and selling their own proprietary biological products, which ties the customer directly to AVNZYM's specific formulations.
Okay, so they have 400 proprietary products, a recurring revenue model based on replenishment, and they are clearly riding a huge wave of biological substitution. If these biological ingredients are becoming structurally essential across dozens of huge industries, just how big is the playing field they are operating on?
The global playing field is substantial, though perhaps not as large as one might intuitively guess, given how ubiquitous enzymes actually are.
Really? How big is it?
The total global enzyme market is valued at roughly $10 to $12 billion annually, and it's growing at a steady compound annual growth rate of about 6 to 7%.
10 to 12 billion globally. I mean, that's a solid growing industry.
It is. But the narrative shifts drastically when you zoom in on India, which is obviously ADVNZYM's primary domestic market and their historical stronghold. The Indian enzyme market is currently valued at only $400 to $500 million.
Wow, that's tiny compared to the global number.
Yeah, it represents a mere 4 to 5% of the total global market.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. India is a manufacturing behemoth. I mean, they process an immense amount of textiles, leather, food, and pharmaceuticals. A $400 million domestic market seems almost paradoxically small for an economy of that scale.
You're right to point that out. The size of the market isn't a reflection of the size of the manufacturing base, though. It's a reflection of extremely low technological penetration rates.
Okay, explain that.
Let's look at the detergents and cleaning sector. In developed markets, say Western Europe or North America, the penetration rate of enzymes in laundry detergents is over 40%. In India, it is less than 10%.
Less than 10%.
Yep. Look at dairy processing. Globally, the enzyme penetration in dairy is over 60%. In India, it is hovering around 15%.
I really want to understand the friction here. The technology clearly exists. I mean, ADVENZYMZ is headquartered right there in Mumbai. They have the strains, they have the bioreactors. Why is an Indian detergent manufacturer or a dairy cooperative refusing to adopt the technology? Is it just a lack of awareness?
No, it's not awareness. It comes down to the brutal realities of cost and the current state of environmental regulation. Traditional, highly polluting chemical surfactants and thermal processes are just simply cheaper to implement if you're not being forced to account for the environmental externalities.
Oh, I see.
Right, so if you're an unbranded, informal detergent manufacturer operating in a mid-tier Indian city, generic chemical surfactants will get the stain out of the shirt at a fraction of the upfront cost of a highly engineered protease enzyme.
So basically, as long as you aren't being fined for dumping the chemical runoff into the local water supply, the math just heavily favors the harsh chemicals.
Unfortunately, yes, it does. The informal economy runs on immediate margin, not long-term sustainability. Therefore, the growth story for ADVNZYMs in India isn't necessarily about inventing a new enzyme.
Right.
It is literally about waiting for the ecosystem's regulations and formalization mandates to catch up to the technology they have already completely mastered.
Wow. They're essentially sitting on a technological goldmine, just waiting for the government and global supply chains to enforce the rules that make their product mandatory.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you can identify three huge structural growth drivers that are acting as a tailwind for them in India right now.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is the formalization of food processing. India is undergoing this massive shift from localized, unregulated street food and loose commodities to packaged, branded food products.
Like supermarket brands.
Yes. When a global giant like Nestle or a huge domestic player like Halderans scales up production, they cannot rely on traditional, highly variable methods. They require standardized enzyme-based quality control to ensure every single biscuit or beverage tastes exactly the same, with the exact same shelf life across a billion consumers.
Right, you just can't achieve that kind of scale without biochemical standardization.
Precisely. The second driver is export compliance. Indian textile mills and leather tanneries are major exporters. But buyers in the European Union and the U.S. are increasingly subject to stringent environmental laws, like the RECH regulations in Europe, which strictly demand residue-free, sustainably processed goods.
Ah, so the buyers are forcing the issue.
Exactly. If a textile mill in Tirupur wants to secure a contract with a major European fashion house, they're being forced to drop the harsh chemical bleaches and adopt enzymatic processing, basically regardless of the upfront costs in rupees.
So the global supply chain is just imposing compliance locally.
Yeah, they have to adapt or lose the business. And the third driver is the overarching global push for sustainability, specifically regarding energy and water conservation. Heating water for industrial laundry or dairy processing requires an immense amount of fossil fuels.
Right. Boiling water is expensive.
Very expensive. Engineered enzymes can be designed to function perfectly in cold water or at much lower temperatures, which effectively allows factories to slash their thermal energy bills.
Okay, so the demand is being pulled forward by regulatory gravity, environmental mandates, and the shift toward branded consumption. But how does that actually translate to the bottom line for ABNZYMs? If a textile mill is forced to switch, are they just going to go out and buy huge volumes of the absolute cheapest generic bulk enzyme they can find?
Initially, yeah, they might look for the cheapest option. But the phenomenon driving actual profitability in this sector is something called value migration.
Value migration. Okay, what does that mean?
Buyers across these industries are migrating from broad-spectrum, generic enzymes to application-specific multifunctional enzymes.
What does that actually look like in practice, though?
Let's stick with the detergent example. A basic, generic protease enzyme will break down protein stains, sure, but it might completely degrade if the water gets too hot, or it might become totally inactive depending on the pH level of the specific washing machine.
It's fragile.
Exactly. A sophisticated detergent brand doesn't want that kind of unreliability. They will go to ADVNZYMS and demand a highly customized protease that is specifically engineered to remain entirely stable in cold water at a highly specific alkaline pH, all while sitting in a liquid detergent bottle for 6 months on a hot supermarket shelf.
Wow, okay, that is a much tougher engineering problem to solve than just scooping generic powder out of a vat.
It is. And because it is a complex, specialized product, solving a highly specific problem for the client, ADEENZYMS can command profound pricing power. This value migration allows them to hike their prices by 3 to 5% annually, even in market segments where the total volume of enzymes sold remains completely flat.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, they aren't just selling weight, they are capturing a percentage of the economic efficiency they create for the customer.
Capturing that value migration sounds fantastic in theory. I mean, it's the ideal trajectory for a B2B biotech firm. But we need to ground this in the reality of the competitive landscape. ADVANZYMs is a heavyweight in India, obviously, but the sources make it clear that on the global stage, they are a very small fish.
Oh, absolutely.
So how do they actually survive and compete against the industry titans?
It is the defining tension of their entire business model. The global enzyme market is not a fragmented free-for-all. It is a highly consolidated oligopoly.
Just a few big players.
Exactly. You have European giants like Novonesis, which was recently formed from the mega merger of Novozymes and Chr. Hansen, and along with massive conglomerates like BASF and DSM, these top-tier players hold roughly 75% of the global market share together.
75%. That means 3 or 4 companies essentially dictate the terms of the entire global biological supply chain.
Pretty much.
And where does ABVNZYMs fit into that pie chart?
On a global scale, they are a microscopic niche supplier. They hold less than 0.1% of the global market.
That's staggering. Novonesis is a multi-billion-dollar behemoth with research budgets that probably dwarf ADVNZYM's entire market capitalization.
The disparity in resources is definitely immense, but the dynamic fundamentally shifts when you observe the domestic Indian market. In India, ADVNZYMAs is not the underdog. They are the undisputed market leader in probiotics and a top-tier challenger in specialty enzymes.
Okay, so how are they doing that?
The key to understanding this divergence is that the basis of competition changes entirely depending on the geography. Globally, the arena is defined by proprietary strain patents. The giants own the deep intellectual property, and they guard it fiercely.
So they hold the patents on the specific microbial workhorses.
Yes. In India, however, the patent landscape is slightly less restrictive, and the market is characterized by intense price sensitivity. It is an absolute knife fight over a metric called price per unit activity.
Price per unit activity, okay.
Yeah, Indian customers rarely care about the legacy of the patent. They care about how much catalytic turnover they're getting for every single rupee they spend.
Right, bang for your buck.
Exactly. Furthermore, success in India hinges on navigating a labyrinth of local regulatory approvals, like the FSSAI for food safety or the AWOH Ministry for traditional healthcare products.
Okay, I have to push back here for a second because this is where the logic starts to fray for me.
Fair enough.
I understand that Indian clients are price sensitive, but if the global giants have all the crucial patents, the huge economies of scale, the immense R&D budgets, why do large indie institutions like a major pharmaceutical formulator in Hyderabad or a giant dairy cooperative in Gujarat, why bother buying from ADVSEYM at all?
It's a great question.
Right. If Novonesis genuinely has the best, most efficient strains in the world, shouldn't they just sweep the Indian market purely on performance?
That is the pivotal question. And it comes down to how ADVSEYM has deliberately structured its physical operations to create a highly specific, localized competitive moat. It is essentially a two-pronged defense. First, they operate with total vertical integration.
Meaning they control every single step of the process.
Exactly. Unlike many small Indian rivals who basically just import bulk active ingredients from China or Europe and blend them in a warehouse, ADVSEYM controls the entire biological chain. They conduct their own strain discovery and genetic optimization in their 7 R&D centers.
Oh, wow.
Then they scale up the fermentation process themselves across their 9 global manufacturing plants. This vertical integration grants them a very unique dual advantage. They offer European-level R&D sophistication, but they execute it with Indian manufacturing costs.
Ah, so they are fundamentally cheaper to operate than the European giants, but significantly more scientifically advanced than the local Indian blenders. They are basically occupying the high-value middle ground.
Spot on. But the real answer to your question, why a massive dairy cooperative sticks with them instead of just switching to a European giant, is found in their switching costs.
Yeah.
And those switching costs are generated by their application development labs.
Application development labs. How does an application lab create a switching cost?
So ADVSEYM doesn't just put a barrel of bulk enzymes on a truck, ship it to a client, and say, good luck with the formulation.
Right.
They deploy highly trained technicians and biochemists directly into the client's factory. Imagine the giant textile mill in Tirupur. ADVSEYM will literally send a team to live near that mill for weeks.
Wait, they move in?
Basically, yeah.
Oh.
They will sit down on the factory floor, analyze the specific mineral content of the local water, evaluate the exact pH of the mill's vats, and co-develop a bespoke enzyme formulation to optimize that specific unique production line.
Oh, I see. They aren't just selling a product off the shelf. They're integrating themselves into the customer's actual manufacturing architecture.
Exactly. They create a customized ecosystem of technical support. They effectively become the client's outsourced biochemical engineering department.
That is incredibly smart.
It is. Once a large industrial client has tailored their entire multi-million-dollar production line around ADVSEYM's highly specific formulation, the risk profile of switching to a competitor becomes astronomical.
Because even if Novonesis comes in and says, hey, we can offer an enzyme that is theoretically 10% cheaper.
The client would have to halt production, flush all their systems, run months of pilot tests with the new enzyme, re-optimize their entire line for a different pH or temperature, and risk huge quality control failures on their end products during the transition.
Right. The operational risk completely outweighs whatever marginal cost savings they might get.
Exactly. That extreme stickiness, born from bespoke technical service, is exactly how ADVSEYM defends its turf against players 1,000 times its size.
A deep moat built on specialized technical integration and terrified, sticky customers is basically the dream setup for a B2B supplier. So let's look at the financial realities to see how that operational advantage actually translates into rupees on the balance sheet.
Well, the financial engine driving this company is remarkably robust, especially when you look at their most recent quarters. They reported record performance.
Okay, let's hear the numbers.
For the full financial year 26, their revenue hit 745.8 crore rupees. That represents a very solid 17% year-over-year increase. Their fourth quarter alone pulled in 203.4 crore rupees.
And what about the profitability? Because, revenue is just vanity if the margins aren't actually there.
The bottom line is equally impressive. Their net profit, or PAT, for FY26 was 168.7 crore rupees.
Those are serious numbers, especially coming off the demand weakness and supply chain disruptions they experienced a few years prior in FY23.
Yeah, they really bounced back. The underlying profitability is driven by the fundamentally high-margin nature of specialty biotechnology. When you look at their historical EBITDA margins, they generally sit very comfortably between 25 and 30%.
That's healthy.
And in Q2 of FY26, they actually pushed that up to 33%.
Wow. And I assume that profit isn't distributed evenly across all 400 products, right? Where is the bulk of that cash actually being generated? Because selling baking enzymes has to be a very different business than selling pharmaceutical API.
Oh, absolutely. You've identified the core asymmetry of their business right there. The undisputed golden goose of their entire portfolio is the human nutrition segment.
Okay.
This segment, which includes the digestive enzymes, the probiotics, and those anti-inflammatory APIs like serratiopeptidase we talked about earlier, it accounts for roughly 66% of their total sales.
2/3 of the business is just human health.
Yes. And the gross margins in this specific segment are staggering. They're estimated to sit between 55 and 65%.
I need to pause on that.
Yeah.
A 55 to 65% gross margin is software-level profitability.
It really is.
Tech companies get those margins because they write code once and replicate it infinitely for basically zero marginal cost. But ADVNEYMS is manufacturing physical biological products in giant stainless steel vats. How are they achieving software margins on a physical product?
It perfectly illustrates why their strategic shift toward premium proprietary APIs and specialized health products was the right move. The stark margin differences within the company kind of tell the whole story.
How so?
Well, selling a generic enzyme to break down starch in a textile mill might have a gross margin of, say, 20% because it's largely commoditized. But selling a highly purified proprietary enzyme that a pharmaceutical company relies on to make a life-saving drug commands a huge premium. The value provided is immense, and the barriers to entry are incredibly high.
But maintaining those astronomical margins requires a deep understanding of their manufacturing realities, right? Because while the gross margins look like a software company, the physical realities of the factory floor are entirely industrial.
Oh, they are completely industrial. The manufacturing process, which is biological fermentation, is an incredibly capital-intensive and demanding physical reality. A bioreactor is not just a simple mixing bowl. It is a massive, highly complex vessel.
Paint a picture of this for me. What does this actually look like on the floor?
Imagine a towering stainless steel vat, perhaps holding 100,000 liters of liquid. Inside this vat, you are cultivating billions of living microbes.
Okay.
This requires immense continuous energy to run these giant impellers for agitation, just ensuring the microbes are evenly distributed. You have to pump in highly sterilized air for aeration.
Right, because they need to breathe.
Exactly. And you need these huge cooling jackets to dissipate the heat generated by the biological metabolism of the microbes, because if the temperature spikes by even a few degrees, the entire batch just dies.
Wow, so the energy costs alone must be astronomical.
They're very high. Fermentation plants possess incredibly high fixed costs. You have heavy depreciation on the specialized steel, huge utility requirements for steam and electricity, and a small army of technicians running continuous quality control assays.
So because roughly 60% of their total manufacturing costs are entirely fixed, they have immense operating leverage.
Precisely. Their profitability spikes dramatically once overall plant utilization crosses a threshold of roughly 70%.
Ah, okay.
If utilization falls below 70%, those fixed costs for electricity and depreciation weigh down the margins heavily. But once they cross 70%, almost every additional rupee of revenue they generate drops straight to the bottom line because the fixed costs are already covered.
So what does this all mean? It means they have constructed a highly profitable, cash-generating setup, provided they can flawlessly execute two imperatives. They have to sell enough product to keep those VAPs running near full capacity at all times, and they have to carefully manage the timing of their biology.
Yeah, managing the timing their biological inventory is perhaps their most complex operational challenge. Growing biological inputs isn't like stamping metal car parts where you can just speed up the assembly line if demand spikes.
You can't just tell a microbe to reproduce faster.
You cannot rush biology. It takes 3 to 6 months to cultivate these specific strains from a seed culture, scale them up through progressively larger bioreactors, harvest the enzymes, separate the biomass, and spray dry the liquid into a stable powder.
3 to 6 months.
Yes. Consequently, ADEENNZYMS has to build and hold inventory for 90 to 120 days just to ensure they have enough product to meet customer orders.
That creates a very intense working capital cycle.
It fundamentally shapes their cash flow. They have immense amounts of cash tied up in vats of fermenting microbes in warehouses full of specialized powder for months before they can finally ship the product, send an invoice, and actually collect the cash.
It's a really delicate balancing act of biology and finance. But, let's look to the future. With record profits in the bank for FY26, a 33% EBITDA margin, and the structural tailwinds of sustainability behind them, the obvious question from the market is, what exactly is the roadmap for the next decade? Where do they deploy this capital to maintain that growth?
Their growth roadmap is built on several strategic pillars, largely focused on moving further up the value chain. First, they are doubling down on high-value new segments where they believe their specialized R&D can command those high margins.
Okay, like what?
They see substantial potential in animal nutrition, but specifically they are moving aggressively into the premium pet food space. They're formulating specialized probiotics and digestive aids for dogs and cats.
Which is a rapidly growing, highly premiumized market globally. I mean, people will spend premium prices on their pets.
Absolutely they will. They are also aggressively targeting biocatalysis.
I saw that term in the sources. What exactly does biocatalysis mean in this context?
So biocatalysis is the use of engineered enzymes to mediate complex chemical synthesis, particularly for manufacturing pharmaceutical APIs.
Okay.
Traditionally, synthesizing a complex drug requires multiple steps using harsh, toxic chemical solvents at high temperatures. Biocatalysis replaces those toxic steps with a single enzymatic reaction that occurs at room temperature, mostly in water.
Oh, so it's a huge energy saver.
It is. It is the cornerstone of green chemistry. It's cleaner, it's safer, and crucially for pharma companies, enzymes offer perfect chiral purity, meaning they build the exact molecular shape required without producing unwanted byproducts.
Biocatalysis makes perfect sense to me. It aligns flawlessly with their existing strengths in high-margin pharma applications and their core competency in fermentation. But they are also making a major geographic pivot in their strategy, right?
Yes, and this pivot is largely defensive. Historically, the United States has been a vital, high-margin export market for them. However, they are currently facing severe macroeconomic headwinds there.
Like what kind of headwinds?
They are battling significant tariff issues and intense input inflation in the U.S., which actually caused their U.S. business segment to contract in 2026.
A contraction in the U.S. is a major red flag for a company relying on global scale.
It is. Because of these persistent headwinds, they are pivoting their strategic focus. They are leaning heavily into Europe. They are currently awaiting crucial novel food regulatory approvals from the European Food Safety Authority, which would unlock huge new addressable markets for their probiotics.
And I assume they're focusing more on India, too.
Exactly. Simultaneously, they are deepening their dominance in the rapidly formalizing domestic Indian market, banking on those tailwinds we discussed earlier.
Okay, I track the logic on biocatalysis. I track the defensive logic on the geographic pivot to Europe and India. But there's another piece of their roadmap buried in the sources that I have to express some serious skepticism about.
Oh, the consumer brand.
Yes. They are actively scaling a direct-to-consumer B2C probiotics brand called Welfa.
Yeah, their foray into retail.
Launching a retail consumer brand seems completely contrary to their identity as a B2B Intel Inside supplier. We literally just spent 20 minutes discussing how their moat is built on highly specialized technicians working on factory floors.
Right.
So is this Welfa brand a genius move to capture those fat retail margins instead of sharing them with the end brand? Or is this a dangerous, hubristic distraction from their core competency of industrial fermentation?
This raises a really important question about the limits of organizational capability. On a spreadsheet, sure, capturing the retail margin looks incredibly attractive. Why sell bulk probiotic powder for $10 a kilo when you could put it in a nice bottle and sell it for $100 a kilo to a consumer, right?
Right. The math is incredibly seductive.
But the reality of execution is entirely different. The skills required to optimize a recombinant microbial strain in a 100,000-liter bioreactor have absolutely zero overlap with the skills required to run a digital brand building campaign or manage direct-to-consumer Instagram marketing or optimize supply chains for individual bottles.
Or fight brutal wars for retail shelf space or algorithmic placement on e-commerce platforms.
Exactly. Selling 50 tons of serratiopeptidase to a pharma formulator involves a 2-year sales cycle based on rigorous clinical data and technical audits. Trying to convince a consumer on social media to buy a Welfa probiotic gummy is a completely different universe of business.
It's totally different.
It introduces a significant risk of management distraction. If Welfa fails to scale efficiently, it could quickly become a sinkhole for capital. Capital that, frankly, should have been deployed into expanding their core R&D pipelines or upgrading their fermentation facilities. It requires them to exercise entirely different corporate muscles.
That tension between their deep biotech ambition, their desire to capture retail margins, and the harsh realities of execution leads us perfectly into the dark side of this story. We've talked about the record profits, the high margins, and the deep technological moat. What are the actual cracks in the foundation? If I'm an investor looking at this durable powerhouse, what are the vulnerabilities that could break this growth story?
The most glaring vulnerability, which is clearly highlighted in the financial analysis, is customer concentration.
Okay, how concentrated are we talking?
Despite boasting a portfolio of over 400 products and claiming over 700 customers globally, their top 10 customers make up approximately 35% of their total revenue.
35% from just 10 clients. That is a highly concentrated, incredibly fragile risk profile for a company supposedly supplying a diversified global market across 3 distinct industries.
It creates a very precarious dynamic regarding pricing power. We noted earlier that their human nutrition segment enjoys gross margins of up to 65%. But if just 1 or 2 of those major clients in the pharma or food processing segments decide to threaten to switch to a lower-cost competitor, or if they simply use their immense purchasing power to demand aggressive price cuts,
ADVNZYMS is cornered. They either accept the margin compression or they lose a huge chunk of their top-line revenue overnight.
it's an unenviable negotiating position, to say the least. And given that they have historically operated with overall gross profit margins hovering around 80% in their absolute prime, losing pricing power against those major clients would be devastating to their bottom line.
It's like driving a high-performance sports car. You've got this incredibly tuned engine, these fantastic high margins, but you are driving it on a road where a single pothole, like one major client deciding to leave, or a sudden shock to the supply chain, can completely snap the axle.
That's a great way to look at it.
The suspension is just too tight, one bad bump, and the whole margin structure craters.
We are already seeing a significant pothole emerge regarding their raw material input costs.
The food for the microbes, right?
Yes, the fermentation substrates. To grow billions of microbes, you have to feed them massive quantities of agricultural commodities, primarily corn and wheat.
Right, which fluctuate wildly.
Exactly. Recently, the rising global costs for these substrates, combined with elevated industrial energy prices to run the plants, have compressed their overall gross margins down to the 72 to 73% range.
That's a significant drop from 80%.
It is. And when you are operating a business with high fixed costs, as we discussed with the bioreactors, a sustained drop in gross margin hits the net profit incredibly hard if you lack the leverage to pass those increased costs onto the customer.
Which, if you are highly dependent on 10 major clients, you probably cannot pass on easily without risking the entire account.
Furthermore, their flagship product, the anti-inflammatory serratiopeptidase, is facing intense and growing competitive pressure.
Oh, really?
Yeah, industry analysts are currently noting a severe risk of a 2 to 5% revenue drop, specifically in this vital human healthcare segment, because rival biotech firms are actively trying to reverse engineer and replicate the enzyme more cheaply.
If that technological differentiation buffer vanishes, their most profitable segment is suddenly exposed to a brutal race to the bottom on price.
Exactly. And, we haven't even touched on the regulatory tightrope they're walking every single day.
Right. The FDA.
The regulatory landscape might be the most existential binary threat they face. Over 50% of their total revenue is generated through exports. They are entirely dependent on staying in the absolute good graces of strict international regulators, primarily the FDA in the United States and the EFSA in Europe.
So the bioreactors have to remain immaculate at all times.
Perfect. A single failed regulatory audit, a critical observation report from the FDA, or a mandatory product recall wouldn't just result in a financial penalty.
What happens then?
It could trigger an immediate embargo, basically locking them out of key global markets for 12 to 24 months while they remediate the facility and seek reapproval.
12 to 24 months of zero export revenue from your biggest markets. I mean, that wouldn't just break the growth story. It could threaten the solvency of the entire operation.
It's a huge risk.
When a company is facing these kinds of existential binary export risks, margin squeezes from raw agricultural materials, and the urgent need to pivot away from a contracting U.S. market, everything ultimately comes down to the people steering the ship. So who are the captains here? Let's look at the management and the corporate governance.
ADEENZYMEs is fundamentally driven by its original promoters, Vasant and Chandrakant Rathi. And it's important to note, these are not MBA executives drafted in from a consulting firm. They are hardcore scientists.
That's usually a good thing in biotech.
It is. They bring over 40 years of deep domain expertise in biotechnology, strain isolation, and industrial fermentation. They understand the core technology on a molecular level because they basically help build the industry in India.
Having technically proficient founders is usually a huge advantage in a specialized field like this. And looking at the cap table, the promoter holding is very high, sitting comfortably at 43.26%.
Yeah, that high ownership ensures their financial interests are deeply intertwined with the company's performance. Furthermore, we saw a very strong signal of executive confidence recently. There was significant insider buying.
Oh, really? Who bought?
Vasant Rathi personally purchased $5.37 million worth of shares in March 2026.
Wow. Insider buying of that magnitude is rarely ambiguous. I mean, it is usually a very strong signal that management internally believes the stock is currently undervalued by the public market, or that they know highly positive news is on the horizon.
Right. Plus, looking at the governance metrics, they have 0 shares pledged as collateral for personal loans, which removes a layer of financial risk, and they maintain a very healthy, consistent 32% dividend payout policy.
Those are undeniable positives. They are brilliant scientists with skin in the game. But, the broader market's assessment of this management team is heavily weighed down by a severe, persistent execution disconnect.
Yes, that is the core issue here.
An execution disconnect. Let's dig into that.
Despite their undeniable technical brilliance in the laboratory, the financial outcomes over the medium term have been alarmingly sluggish. If you look at their 5-year sales growth, it is a mere 8.24%.
8%.
Yeah, and their 3-year return on equity, which is a key measure of how efficiently they are generating profits from shareholder capital, is a remarkably low 10.4%.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have these brilliant biotech pioneers. They built a portfolio of over 400 proprietary, highly complex products from scratch. They operate with gross margins that occasionally rival software companies, but a 5-year sales growth of 8%. In a rapidly developing Indian economy, 8% barely outpaces inflation.
It's not great.
It definitely doesn't scream durable powerhouse taking over the world. And there is an even more concerning metric buried in the financial notes here. Their working capital days have doubled, going from 205 days to 402 days.
That metric is a highly concerning indicator of deep operational inefficiency.
I'm trying to picture the physical reality of 402 days. That means it takes them well over a year, on average, to convert their initial investments in corn, wheat, and utilities back into actual cash in the bank.
Yes, exactly.
They buy the wheat, they feed it to the microbes for months, they spray dry the powder, they let the powder sit in a warehouse in Nashik, they finally ship it to a client in Germany, and then they wait months for the client to actually pay the invoice. A 18-month cycle implies severe blockages in their operational pipeline.
It points to a systemic buildup of inventory. This is likely due to slower than anticipated demand conversion, meaning they are brewing enzymes that clients simply aren't buying quickly enough. Or it points to fundamental miscalculations in their supply chain forecasting.
Neither of which are good.
No, and this is combined with elongated receivable cycles, where their major customers are simply taking much longer to pay their bills, and ADVNZYS clearly lacks the leverage to force faster payment.
It traps millions of rupees of cash in warehouses. Cash that should be used for building that massive new R&D center they mentioned, or expanding into Europe, or increasing those dividend payouts.
Exactly. And this operational inefficiency is compounded by lingering corporate governance concerns mentioned by analysts. There is a documented track record of poor board attendance by the key promoters. 2 out of 3 were noted as absent for 2 consecutive years of board meetings.
2 years.
Yeah. Additionally, analysts point to a historical pattern of management over-promising operational performance to the market during earnings calls, and then consistently under-delivering on those specific targets.
It paints a picture of an organization that is fundamentally imbalanced at the top level.
That is the inevitable conclusion to draw from these conflicting data points. They have incredibly deep bench strength in R&D, strain discovery, and plant operations. If you need a microbe engineer to break down a specific protein at exactly 42 degrees Celsius, they can do it.
Right.
But the contraction of their vital U.S. business, the alarming doubling of their working capital days, and their apparent struggle to pass on rising input costs to their concentrated client base, it all suggests a profound lack of organizational capability in other crucial areas.
They seem to lack the ruthless operational discipline required to run a global logistics chain.
They appear to lack the robust international sales teams required to diversify away from those top 10 clients.
Yeah.
They lack the agile regulatory talent needed to navigate shifting U.S. tariffs smoothly, and the rigorous financial discipline needed to fight on the global stage against highly optimized, diversified players like Novonesis.
It sounds like the classic founder's trap. I mean, the visionary scientific brilliance that built the company from the ground up, isolating strains in a lab 30 years ago, might not be the same cold operational discipline required to navigate a volatile, incredibly complex, globalized supply chain today.
The science is proven, and the structural tailwinds are real, but the business execution remains the primary, highly volatile variable here.
This brings us back to the core tension we've been circling throughout this entire deep dive. Advanced is a genuinely fascinating R&D powerhouse. They are sitting directly on top of a structural gold mine as industries worldwide, from textiles to dairy, are being forced by regulation and economics to abandon polluting chemicals in favor of precise biological solutions.
They are perfectly positioned.
They have the technology. They have the undisputed domestic leadership in an underpenetrated Indian market. Yet their vast potential is heavily constrained by U.S. tariffs, intensely concentrated customer risks, an agonizingly long cash conversion cycle, and a management team that appears to struggle with consistent global business execution.
The context here is so much larger than just one single company's financials or working capital days. When you take a step back and think about the sheer complexity of the modern industrial supply chain, it is genuinely astonishing.
It really is.
The fact that replacing a single toxic textile bleaching chemical that has been used cheaply for a century requires a multi-year biological fermentation process, the discovery of specific indigenous microbial strains, and the complete re-engineering of factory floor parameters. It shows how difficult the transition to a sustainable economy actually is.
It's not an overnight flip of a switch.
Not at all. Companies like Advanced, despite their operational flaws, are the entities quietly driving this invisible, essential sustainability revolution.
They really are the hidden biological code making the future of manufacturing possible. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a hypothetical scenario to mull over, building on the competitive dynamics we've discussed today.
Okay, let's hear it.
We know enzymes are the non-negotiable future of global manufacturing. We know India is a vastly underpenetrated market just waiting for formalization and regulatory enforcement. What happens when a global titan like Novonesis decides they are finally tired of conceding the Indian domestic market to a local player?
That's a scary thought for them.
What happens if Novonesis decides to leverage its enormous global economies of scale to aggressively and deliberately underprice their proprietary products in India, specifically to capture that impending wave of formalization?
Right, a true price war.
Exactly. Can Advanced's localized domestic moat, their bespoke application labs on the factory floors, and their hard-won client loyalty actually survive a deliberate, well-funded, multi-year price war? Or, when faced with that kind of overwhelming financial pressure, are they destined to simply become a prime, highly profitable acquisition target for the very global giants they are currently fighting against?
It would be the ultimate existential test of how deep their competitive moat truly is.
It really would. At the start of this deep dive, we talked about the X-ray, the comfort of a clean, highly visible binary diagnosis.
Broken or not broken.
Exactly. The story of ADVENZYMS proves that the most critical mechanisms powering our world and the complex corporate business models trying to capture their immense value are rarely clean or visible. They are intricate, they are hidden, and they require a much deeper look to truly understand.